The joints between the stones are tighter than surgical tolerances. Each gap averages half a millimeter across 13 acres, across 2.3 million individual blocks, each weighing on average 2.5 tons, with some exceeding 70. The official account says this was done with copper chisels, wooden sledges, and human hands, organized over roughly 20 years in the Bronze Age Nile Valley. The copper tools have been found, the workers' village has been excavated, the administrative papyri have been read, the ramps have been modeled and remodeled and argued about in peer-reviewed journals for 40 years. And yet no team furnished with modern precision instruments, laser alignment guides, and diamond-tipped cutting equipment has come close to replicating those joint tolerances at anything approaching that scale, in anything approaching that time frame. Every time the experiment is run, the gap remains. So what exactly are we looking at when we look at these structures? Not with wonder, not with credulity, but with the sober, measurement-led question that the evidence itself keeps raising. What did the people who built these things actually know? And where did that knowledge go? Before we get into the list, a note on method, because this channel does not deal in sensation, it deals in measurement. Every structure you are about to encounter has been studied, excavated, dated, and analyzed by credentialed researchers working within established scientific frameworks. Archaeology is not guessing. It is a discipline built on physical evidence, stratigraphic context, comparative ethnography, materials science, and experimental reconstruction. These are serious people doing serious work, and for the vast majority of structures in the human record, the tools of that discipline are entirely sufficient. We know how most things were built. We know by whom, using what, and roughly when. The record is genuinely rich. What follows is not that majority. The standard position on anomalous pre-classical construction is this: given sufficient time, sufficient labor, sufficient social organization, and sufficient motivation, human communities are capable of feats that appear, at first glance, to exceed their technological threshold. The pyramids look impossible until you read the logistics studies. Stonehenge looks otherworldly until you model the workforce numbers. And to be clear, for many of the structures in the historical record, that standard position holds completely. Sustained collective effort, combined with knowledge systems we have not fully recovered, explains a great deal of what once seemed inexplicable. But what follows tonight represents a specific subset, the cases where that model runs into measurements it was never designed to explain. Not because the builders were not capable of extraordinary things, the evidence says unambiguously that they were, but because the gap between what archaeology can confirm they possessed, in tools, in transport, in time, and what the structures physically required to be built as they actually are, has not been closed, not by any published model, not yet. That gap is what we are here to examine, carefully, without theater. Number 5. Machu Picchu, Peru. Constructed circa 1450 CE, during the reign of the Inca Emperor Pachacuti, the 9th Sapa Inca, and the ruler credited with transforming the Inca state from a regional kingdom into the largest empire in pre-Columbian America. The site was formally documented by Western scholarship in 1911 when American historian Hiram Bingham reached it, guided by local farmers who had known of it all along. The mainstream account of Machu Picchu is well established, well evidenced, and in broad strokes entirely convincing. The Inca were masterful engineers by any reasonable standard. They constructed the Kipaknan, the Andean road system, a network of approximately 40,000 kilometers of paths, bridges, and tunnels spanning the western coast of South America, from what is now Colombia to Chile, built across some of the most geographically challenging terrain on Earth. They developed sophisticated agricultural terracing systems, andonets, capable of sustaining large, dense populations at altitude without depleting the soil. They managed food storage and redistribution across a continent using a labor tribute system called the Mita, which mobilized communities for state projects with an efficiency that modern supply chain theorists study with genuine admiration. Machu Picchu, set at 2,430 meters on a saddle ridge in the Cusco region of the Peruvian Andes, is understood to have been a royal estate, and Lacta, possibly constructed as a personal retreat for Pachacuti, possibly as a ceremonial complex for the veneration of the sun deity Inti, almost certainly as both simultaneously. It covers approximately 13 square kilometers, contains around 200 structures, and was occupied for roughly a century before being abandoned, likely in the chaotic decades following the Spanish conquest of the 1530s, which is almost certainly why it remained unknown to the outside world until Bingham. So far, so explicable. The Inca had the organization, the motivation, and the workforce. That part of the story holds. Here is what the standard account does not fully absorb. The dry stone construction technique used throughout Machu Picchu, particularly at the primary ceremonial and load-bearing structures, is a method called ashlar. Stones are shaped and fitted together without mortar, without filler, and without binding compound of any kind. The structural integrity of the wall depends entirely on the precision of the contact between adjacent stone faces. In most applications of ashlar construction across history, including medieval European cathedrals and Roman civic buildings, small gaps between stones are normal and acceptable. Mortar, grout, or carefully selected rubble infill compensates for surface imperfection and distributes load across the joint. At Machu Picchu, in the primary temple structures and the most significant ceremonial walls, there is no infill. The stones fit against one another with contact tolerances that structural engineers who have studied the site describe consistently as effectively zero. Not approximately zero, not close to zero, effectively zero, meaning that under measurement, with modern instruments, the gap between adjacent stone faces at the contact surface is below the threshold of reliable detection. Now consider what this required. The Inca had no iron. The metalworking tradition of the Andean civilizations, while sophisticated in copper, bronze, and gold, did not produce iron tools. The cutting implements confirmed by archaeological recovery at Inca sites are primarily quartzite and obsidian, hard stones used to shape softer ones, with harder stone hammers used for roughing out. You are shaping granite, a material with a Mohs hardness of 6 to 7, with stone tools, and achieving surface-to-surface contact tolerances that modern masons using tungsten carbide equipment consider a mark of excellence. The result of that precision is not merely aesthetic. Machu Picchu sits in one of the most seismically active regions on Earth. The Nazca and South American tectonic plates interact directly beneath the Andes, producing earthquakes that have destroyed numerous colonial Spanish structures built in the same region over the past 5 centuries. Machu Picchu has not been destroyed. Seismic testing of the structure has demonstrated that the zero-tolerance ashlar jointing allows individual stones to move microscopically under seismic load, displacing a fraction of a millimeter in response to the vibration, and then resettle into their original position without displacement or structural failure. The wall absorbs the earthquake rather than resisting it. This is a known principle in modern earthquake engineering. It is called base isolation or seismic dissipation through joint articulation. It is built into Machu Picchu, deliberately, in every load-bearing wall. That is not an accident of craftsmanship. That is a feature, a designed structural response to a geophysical environment that the builders understood and engineered against. With stone tools, in the 15th century, the evidence does not argue, it simply sits there. The most compelling counter-argument is the one archaeologists have actually tested in the field, that the Inca simply had more time, more skilled stone shapers, and more accumulated craft knowledge than the apparent precision of the output initially suggests. Experimental archaeology conducted at multiple sites has demonstrated, credibly, that obsidian and quartzite tools used by experienced masons over extended working periods can produce remarkably flat, consistent stone surfaces. The proposed method, grinding two stone faces together using a fine abrasive medium, checking fit repeatedly, grinding again, over a period of months or in some cases years per major block, is physically plausible and has been partially replicated in controlled experiments. The argument holds that what appears, at first glance, to be machine-grade precision is actually the cumulative product of prolonged skilled abrasion guided by experienced hands rather than precision instruments. Given the scale of Inca labor organization and the dynasty's documented ability to sustain long-duration state projects, this is not logistically untenable. The workforce was there, the time was available, the craft tradition was deep, and it would hold as a complete explanation, if not for the seismic engineering. Prolonged abrasion explains flat surfaces. It can explain, given sufficient time, joint tolerances that approach zero. What it does not explain is the consistent application of that precision across every stone in every load-bearing sequence in a way that produces measurable, repeatable seismic dissipation. Achieving flat surfaces by grinding is one skill. Distributing those flat-jointed stones in a wall configuration that functions as a designed seismic response system implies a second level of knowledge, an understanding of dynamic load behavior under lateral stress. A structural model of how vibration propagates through a jointed masonry assembly and how joint geometry can be used to dissipate rather than transmit that energy. Archaeology has not found evidence of that level of structural theory in the Inca knowledge record. The quipu, the knotted cord information system used by the Inca in lieu of writing, has not been fully decoded. It is possible that knowledge existed there, but as of the current evidentiary record, it is not documented. And that detail has no satisfactory account in the mainstream model. The Inca had no written language as we would recognize it. Their knowledge systems, agricultural, astronomical, logistical, and perhaps structural, were encoded in the quipu, in oral tradition, and in the embodied practice of master craftspeople, whose lineages died with the disruption of the conquest. We have recovered the stones. We have not recovered the knowledge system that produced them. Is it possible that the structural engineering embedded in Machu Picchu's walls reflects a theory of seismic response that was understood, transmitted, and then lost entirely within the human record, without any extraordinary intervention? Yes, entirely possible. Is the knowledge system that allowed a 15th century Andean civilization to out-engineer a 20th century earthquake code using stone tools something we should be more curious about than we currently are? Also yes. Number 4 takes that question somewhere older and considerably harder to explain. Number 4. The Kailasa Temple, Maharashtra, India, constructed in the 8th century CE, attributed to the patronage of the Rashtrakuta king, Dantidurga, and his successor Krishna the Hearst. The temple is one of 34 rock-cut cave temples and monasteries at the Ellora complex, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but it is categorically different in method and scale from every other structure at the site. The Rashtrakuta dynasty ruled the Deccan Plateau of central India from approximately 735 to 982 CE. At their height, they were one of the dominant powers of the Indian subcontinent, controlling territory from the northern Deccan to parts of the south, and engaged in sustained cultural and political rivalry with the Gurjara Pratihara and Pala empires. They were prolific patrons of the arts and of religious architecture. The Ellora complex, which contains Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain monuments carved directly into the volcanic basalt of the Charanandri Hills, represents the accumulated artistic output of several centuries and multiple ruling dynasties. Most of the caves were created by carving inward from the cliff face, excavating horizontal chambers, shaping pillars, cutting relief panels, working from the existing rock surface into the hill. The Kailasa Temple is not that. The Kailasa Temple, Cave 16 in the standard archaeological numbering, was created by beginning at the top of the hill and working downward. Workers did not carve inward. They removed the mountain from around the temple, leaving the temple as the residual form. The structure that stands is not a building inserted into rock. It is a building defined by the rock that was taken away. This distinction, subtraction rather than construction, is what makes Kailasa unique, not just at Ellora, but in the entire documented human record. Here is the figure that stops engineers cold and has done for every decade since the site was formally studied. To create the Kailasa Temple as it exists, the workforce removed an estimated 200,000 tons of volcanic basalt rock from the surrounding mountain mass. This is not a rough figure. It is derived from the measured volume of the excavated space, the open courtyard surrounding the temple, the galleries cut into the cliff faces on either side, the trench that separates the main shrine from the surrounding rock compared against the volume of the remaining structure. 200,000 tons removed, carrying that material up and away from the site. Given that the working method was top-down, you start at the surface of the hill and cut down, means the debris was being lifted out of a deepening pit throughout the project's duration. The structure that was left behind covers approximately 900 square meters at its base, rises to roughly 30 meters at the main Shikara Tower, the height of a 10-story building, and is covered on every accessible surface in figural sculpture of extraordinary technical refinement. Elephants in procession, life-sized and anatomically detailed, support the plinth of the main shrine on three sides. Narrative relief panels depicting scenes from the Ramayana and Mahabharata wrap continuously around the outer walls. Deities, celestial musicians, and mythological creatures fill every register. In the interior, carved columns, sculpted ceilings, and multi-armed figures of Shiva, Vishnu, and the goddess Durga demonstrate a mastery of three-dimensional form that art historians consistently rank among the finest stone carving of the period anywhere in the world. This sculpture was not added after the excavation. It was carved simultaneously as part of the same top-down working process. The carvers working the decorative program were operating alongside and in coordination with the teams removing the bulk material around them. Now consider the error tolerance of the method, because here is what makes the Kailasa Temple structurally unique in human building history. Every cut was irreversible. In conventional construction, an error can be corrected. A stone can be recut. A foundation can be reinforced. A wall can be taken down and rebuilt. At Kailasa, every cut into the living rock was permanent. If a structural column was made too narrow by an overzealous cut, it would bear less load than required and eventually fail. If the plinth profile was cut too steeply in one section, the visual proportions of the entire elevation would be distorted with no remedy. If the depth of a panel cut was misjudged, the relief sculpture that panel was intended to carry would be lost. There is no version of this project where you can go back. Every decision made by every worker, from the first cut at the top to the final detail on the lowest plinth, was made in the context of a structure that could only ever be made smaller, never larger, and never corrected. The result of 12 centuries of weathering, vandalism, including the deliberate attack of the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb in the 17th century, who reportedly deployed 1,000 men for 3 years to destroy the temple and gave up and the general entropy of time is still standing, precisely proportioned, structurally sound, covered in detail that modern stone carvers working with power tools estimate would take multiple lifetimes to reproduce. Mysterious pecan frost pecan ferret. No proposed method has closed that gap between the risk profile of the technique and the completeness of the outcome. The most compelling counter-argument for the Kailasa Temple is duration and workforce scale. The Rashtrakuta dynasty, as noted, ruled for approximately 2 centuries. If the temple's construction began under Dantadurga around 756 CE and continued across subsequent reigns, a plausible model given the sustained patronage of the dynasty, the project could have extended across multiple generations, with each generation of craftspeople inheriting and continuing the work of the last. Mysterious and archaeologists who have studied the site carefully suggest a construction window of 18 to 30 years as the most likely range for the primary phase. Over 18 years, 200,000 tons of rock removal averages to roughly 11,000 tons per year, which, distributed across a workforce of several thousand skilled and semi-skilled workers, is physically within the range of what iron tool quarrying in hard volcanic rock can achieve. The top-down working method, which seems counterintuitive from a modern perspective, is actually the only logical approach for this type of monument. It prevents debris from burying the working surface, allows rainwater to drain naturally, and gives the supervising architects a clear view of the entire structure as it develops. This argument is serious. For the bulk excavation component, the removal of material, it largely holds. It would hold as a complete explanation, if not for the sculpture. Removing 200,000 tons of basalt in 18 to 30 years requires a workforce of substantial size, operating primarily in a demolition-grade mode. Heavy hammers, large chisels, sustained physical labor focused on volume rather than precision. The Styrius of Temple's sculptural program, simultaneously executed, is by any art historical standard a body of work that demands master carvers, specialists whose skill developed over decades, and whose attention is by necessity focused, slow, and meticulous. You cannot do both things with the same workforce at the same time. The logistics of supplying, coordinating, housing, and feeding a combined workforce of bulk excavators and master sculptors at the Ellora site, which sits in the remote Sahyadri Hills with no adjacent urban infrastructure, have never been modeled satisfactorily. More significantly, the Rashtrakuta court records that survive, primarily copperplate land grants and inscription records, contain nothing that describes the logistics of the Kailasa construction. No workforce numbers, no duration, no named master architect or chief sculptor. For a project of this scale, executed by a dynasty that otherwise maintained detailed administrative records of its patronage activities, that administrative silence is conspicuously absent from the historical record. That detail remains unaccounted for. Every other major building project in the ancient world that operated at this scale left administrative traces. Egypt left papyrus work records and quarry graffiti. Rome left contracts. The great medieval cathedrals of Europe left accounts and guild records. The builders of the Kailasa Temple, whoever they were, however many of them there were, however long it took, left the temple and nothing else. The monument survives. The knowledge that produced it did not. Number 3 moves us to a different continent, a different millennium, and a logistics problem so specific and so well documented that it has occupied professional researchers for over 200 years without resolution. Number 3. Stonehenge, Wiltshire, England. The primary construction phases are dated by archaeology to approximately 1500 BCE, spanning the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age of Britain. The famous Sarsen stone trilithon circle was erected around 2500 BCE. The site has been continuously studied since the 17th century and is, by measure of accumulated scholarly attention, among the most intensively researched prehistoric monuments on Earth. The archaeological record of Stonehenge is at this point exceptionally detailed. It is not a mystery in the sense of being undocumented. We know the sequence of construction phases with reasonable precision. We know the astronomical alignments. We know the funerary function of the earlier stages, evidenced by the cremated remains of several hundred individuals interred at the site over many centuries. We know from excavations at Durrington Walls, a large Neolithic settlement 3 kilometers northeast of Stonehenge, roughly what kind of community built it. Farming and herding communities of the British Neolithic, capable of organizing large-scale collective labor projects, consuming substantial quantities of livestock at feasting events associated with the monument's construction seasons, and maintaining the site across many generations. The people who built Stonehenge were not primitive. They were organized, motivated, and based on the evidence, engaged in a project of sustained communal and cosmological significance that spans centuries. This is not in dispute. What is in dispute is a single specific logistical fact that sits at the center of every serious analysis of the site and has never been fully resolved. The bluestones at Stonehenge are not local. This has been known for decades, but the precision with which it is now understood is relatively recent. Provenancing studies, the geological fingerprinting of stone samples to identify their source, published in the journal Antiquity in 2019 by researchers from University College London, traced multiple bluestones to specific outcroppings within the Preseli Hills in Pembrokeshire, southwest Wales. Not simply to the Preseli Hills as a general region, to specific named outcrops, Carn Godog and Rossifallen have been identified as probable primary sources. The geological match is precise enough to identify not just the region of origin, but the specific rock face. The straight-line distance from those outcrops to Stonehenge is approximately 225 kilometers. The actual transport route, accounting for the terrain of southwest Wales, the Bristol Channel and Salisbury Plain, would have been considerably longer by any feasible path. Each bluestone weighs between 2 and 5 tons. There are approximately 80 of them at Stonehenge in various states of preservation. At the time of transport, the evidence places the first bluestone phase at approximately 3000 BCE. Wheeled vehicles did not exist in Britain. The wheel appears in Britain's archaeological record approximately 1,000 years later. Draft animals capable of pulling multi-ton loads over extended distance, horses bred and trained for heavy haulage, did not exist in this period in Britain either. The terrain between Pembrokeshire and Salisbury Plain includes the Preseli uplands, river crossings of the Severn and its tributaries, and the chalk downland approach to the plain itself. Experimental archaeology has tested every proposed method: raft transport along the Welsh coast and up the Bristol Channel, land transport on wooden sledges over log rollers, combined river and overland routes. Every model works partially in controlled conditions. None has been demonstrated end to end. Each proposed route requires transshipment between modes, from raft to land, from river to sledge, at multiple points, each of which represents a logistical bottleneck that demands a level of engineering management, leaving no trace in the archaeological record of the period. Put a 5-ton stone in front of you, rope it, now move it 225 kilometers using only what you can confirm existed in 3000 BCE Britain. Not hypothetically, physically. That isn't interpretation, that's what the stone says. The most compelling counter-argument is the glacial transport hypothesis, held by a credentialed minority of researchers including geologist Brian John. The argument runs as follows. During earlier glacial periods, specifically the Anglian glaciation of approximately 450,000 years ago, ice sheets originating in the Irish Sea basin are believed to have extended into parts of southwest England. Under this hypothesis, bluestone erratics, natural pieces of Welsh rock transported and deposited by glacial action, may have been scattered across the landscape of southern Britain before human settlement. The Neolithic builders of Stonehenge, encountering these erratics, may have moved them relatively short distances, tens of kilometers rather than hundreds, to the monument site. This is a serious geological argument. It is not fringe. It has appeared in peer-reviewed literature. If correct, it reduces the human transport problem from a logistical feat that defies current models to something far more consistent with known Neolithic capability. And it would hold, if not for one specific archaeological finding in those 2019 antiquity studies. Researchers examining the Carn Godog and Rosifellen outcroppings found physical evidence of deliberate human quarrying activity, specific fracture patterns, cleared extraction areas, and stone removal profiles consistent with intentional human extraction rather than natural glacial fracture or frost action. The stones were not loose erratics picked up from a field. They were cut from a named rock face deliberately by human hands. Mysterious glacial erratics do not come with quarry signatures. If the quarrying is human and the physical evidence at the source outcrop says it is, then the transport was human. The glacier hypothesis does not survive that finding at full evidentiary strength. The transport remains logistically untenable by any confirmed method, and no proposed solution has been demonstrated end to end. That detail sits outside the official record. The solar and lunar alignments at Stonehenge are not approximate features of a roughly circular monument. They are precise. The midsummer sunrise alignment, the axis from the center of the monument through the heelstone to the horizon, is accurate enough that it functions as a working solar calendar today. The monument tracks lunar cycles across an 18.6-year nodal period. This requires not just observation, but a multi-generational record-keeping system, precise enough to detect a cycle that takes nearly 2 decades to complete. Who taught a community of Neolithic farmers to survey at that level of astronomical accuracy and using what instruments? And if that knowledge was entirely indigenous to 3000 BCE Britain, where did it go? Number 2 is older, more remote, higher in elevation, and the precision anomaly there is not astronomical. It is mechanical, and it has no parallel anywhere in the pre-classical record. But here is where the list stops being a list. 5 sites, 4 continents, civilizations that by every account we possess had no contact with one another, no shared trade route, no common language, no evidence of a transmission pathway, not a single artifact, not a single textual reference, not a single biological or genetic marker connecting Neolithic Wiltshire to pre-Columbian Andean, Peru to 8th century Deccan India, to the Bolivian Altiplano, to Bronze Age Egypt. These civilizations did not know each other existed, and yet across all 5 sites, the same signature, not the same architectural style, not the same religious program, not the same social context, the same precision, the same specific, measurable, physically documented gap between the tools and methods archaeology confirms were available and the tolerance of the finished work as it can be measured today. There is a site not on this list that belongs in this conversation. The megalithic temples of Gujarkim and Mohenjo-daro on Malta, dated by direct stratigraphic dating to approximately 3600 BCE, are among the oldest freestanding stone structures on Earth. They predate Stonehenge by over 1,000 years. They predate the Great Pyramid by more than 1,000 years. and the primary stone jointing technique used in their construction is the same zero-tolerance dry stone ashlar method that appears 3,000 years later and 6,000 kilometers away at Machu Picchu. Malta is a small island in the central Mediterranean. The Inca were on the other side of the planet. There is no conceivable diffusionist pathway between them. Mysterious, either the coincidence of technique, of precision, of the same gap between confirmed capability and achieved result is so extraordinary as to exceed any reasonable probability threshold. Or the question we have been asking, how did they do this, is the wrong question entirely. The right question might be, where did the knowledge come from? Not just for one site, for all of them. Let us hold for a moment what we have assembled so far. Machu Picchu, zero-tolerance dry stone ashlar joining, executed without metal tools, producing measurable seismic dissipation, a structural response to dynamic load that implies an engineering theory archaeology has not found in the Inca knowledge record. The Kailasa Temple, 200,000 tons of volcanic basalt subtracted from above in a single irreversible working direction, producing a freestanding structure of sculptural complexity that has survived 12 centuries and a deliberate demolition attempt with no administrative record of how it was done or by whom. Stonehenge, multi-ton bluestones transported from specifically quarried source outcroppings 225 kilometers away across terrain that makes the journey logistically untenable by any confirmed Bronze Age method, aligned with solar and lunar cycles to a precision that required multi-generational astronomical records. Puma Punku, which is next, and which takes the precision anomaly somewhere that every construction model so far has failed to reach. Each one by itself might be a coincidence of effort, time, and inherited craft knowledge operating at the edge of its capability. Together, they are a pattern. And number one, which follows number two, has not merely extended that pattern, it has made it structurally impossible to dismiss. Number two, Puma Punku, Bolivia, part of the Tiwanaku complex, situated on the Bolivian Altiplano at an elevation of approximately 3,850 meters above sea level, higher than most permanent human settlements on Earth. Mainstream archaeology dates the site's primary construction phase to between 500 and 600 CE, with some stratigraphic evidence suggesting components may predate this range by several centuries. The Tiwanaku civilization was a significant and sophisticated pre-Columbian state centered on the southern shore of Lake Titicaca in what is now Bolivia. At their height, approximately 300 to 1000 CE, they controlled an extensive influence network across the southern Andes, developing and distributing raised field agricultural systems capable of sustaining populations of perhaps 100,000 or more at altitudes that would have otherwise severely constrained food production. Their artistic tradition, characterized by geometric precision and iconographic consistency, influenced Andean cultures for centuries after their decline. The Gateway of the Sun, a single piece of andesite carved with the so-called doorway god, and a surrounding register of 48 winged figures, is one of the most recognizable artifacts of pre-Columbian civilization and has been the subject of sustained art historical and astronomical analysis for over a century. Puma Punku, meaning Gate of the Puma in the Aymara language, was a ceremonial platform complex within the larger Tiwanaku urban site. It now appears as a scatter of massive collapsed and displaced stone blocks across a field of roughly 160 by 60 meters, the original platform having been partially demolished and its components dispersed, possibly by seismic activity, possibly by later deliberate dismantling. What remains are the blocks themselves, and the blocks are the problem. The individual stone blocks at Puma Punku are not simply large, they display a precision of cut that in the current archaeological record of pre-classical South America is without modern parallel. The blocks are primarily of two stone types, red sandstone and gray andesite. The sandstone blocks used for the platform fill and less structurally critical components are large but relatively simply shaped. The andesite blocks, denser, harder, sourced from a quarry near the western shore of Lake Titicaca, approximately 90 kilometers from the site, are the anomaly. These are the H-shaped blocks. The designation describes their cross-sectional profile, a rectangular form with symmetrical recesses cut into both long faces, producing an interlocking geometry that allowed adjacent blocks to be fitted together in a self-locking assembly without mortar or binding material. Some of these blocks weigh over 100 tons, equivalent to approximately 15 adult African elephants or a fully loaded Boeing 737. They were transported from a source 90 kilometers away across terrain that includes the edge of Lake Titicaca, but the weight is not the anomaly. The anomaly is the cut. The H-shaped profile requires machining recesses that meet at exact right angles from multiple planes simultaneously. In modern stone fabrication, this is accomplished with computer-guided milling equipment. The surfaces of the Puma Punku blocks have been examined by researchers using modern metrology instruments. The planar faces are flat to tolerances that published studies describe as consistent with machine milling. The internal angles at the recess corners are consistently 90 degrees under measurement, not approximately 90 degrees, but within the measurement tolerance of the instruments used. The drill holes found in some blocks, circular, of consistent diameter, show no internal tapering, which means they were not made with a pointed tool pressed inward, but with a tool that maintained consistent diameter through the full depth of the hole. Conventional stoneworking, chiseling, grinding, abrasion, leaves characteristic surface striations and edge rounding detectable under magnification. Standard archaeological examination technique can identify tool marks from copper chisels, iron chisels, and stone tools by the pattern of microfractures and surface texture they produce. The Puma Punku cuts do not show those signatures, or they show them inconsistently in ways that the standard tooling models do not fully account for. Every model that explains the rest of the site fails here. The most compelling counter-argument for Puma Punku is the combined template and abrasion model, which several archaeologists have advanced in published literature as a serious alternative to any technology-based explanation. The argument proceeds as follows. The H-shaped profile, while visually complex, is geometrically repetitive. Once a master template for the profile was established, carved into a hard reference material, subsequent blocks could be shaped by abrasion against that template rather than by individual measurement. Stonemasons working with hard basalt grinding tools, guided by a consistent template and given sufficient time, can produce planar surfaces and right-angle recesses with a precision that approaches the measurements observed at Puma Punku. The consistent drill holes may have been produced by tubular reed or bone drills combined with abrasive sand, a technique confirmed at other pre-classical sites in both the Americas and Egypt, where it demonstrably produces clean, consistent cylindrical holes. None of this requires any technology beyond what was available to the Tiwanaku. This is a serious argument. For the surface geometry and angular precision, it is at least partially persuasive. It would largely hold, if not for the organic evidence problem. Reed drills leave organic residue, fragments of reed, where particles from the drilling medium sometimes preserved grains of the abrasive compound. Wooden templates leave wood fibers in tool contact surfaces. Fiber rope, used in any model of block transport at this weight, leaves contact marks on stone and organic debris in the surrounding stratigraphy. At a site at 3,850 meters above sea level, where cold, dry air significantly retards organic decomposition, organic preservation is not merely theoretically possible. It has been demonstrated at Tiwanaku sites where organic material has been recovered from sealed contexts. Archaeological surveys of the Puma Punku blocks and the surrounding stratigraphic layers associated with the construction phase have found no confirmed organic tooling material, no reed, no wood, no fiber rope consistent with transport of 100-ton blocks. The record in the specific categories of evidence that the template and abrasion model requires is conspicuously absent from history. This absence is not proof of extraterrestrial intervention. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and taphonomic processes, the post-depositional changes that affect what survives in the archaeological record, are complex and not fully predictable. It is possible that the organic material existed and did not survive, but the evidentiary gap is there, and in a site where organic preservation has been demonstrated in other contexts, its absence in the specific categories required by the mainstream construction model is a gap the model has not closed. That detail remains unaccounted for. The Tiwanaku civilization declined around 1000 CE. Climate modeling suggests a prolonged drought, possibly lasting decades, may have undermined the raised field agricultural system on which their population density depended, precipitating a collapse that left the urban centers at Tiwanaku and Puma Punku abandoned within a generation. The people who built Puma Punku, who possessed, by the physical evidence in the stone, a stone-cutting capability that remains without modern parallel in pre-classical South American archaeology, departed. The knowledge they carried, encoded in no surviving written system, in no recoverable oral tradition, in no artifact that explains its own production, went with them. And then there is number one, which has been studied continuously since the 17th century, which has been measured with instruments ranging from surveying chains to satellite GPS, which has generated more published research, more proposed models, more experimental reconstruction attempts than any other structure in human history, and which, after all of that attention, retains an anomaly at its core that no published model has closed. Number 1. The Great Pyramid of Giza, Egypt, constructed circa 2560 BCE during the reign of the 4th dynasty pharaoh Khufu. It stood as the tallest structure on Earth for approximately 3,800 years, until the completion of Lincoln Cathedral's central spire in 1311 CE. It remains the oldest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the only one still standing. No structure in the human record has generated more scholarship, more measurement, more experimental reconstruction, and more unresolved professional debate than the Great Pyramid of Giza. And the mainstream account of its construction, let us be precise, is not mythology. It is a substantial body of evidence accumulated over 2 centuries of serious archaeological work. The funerary purpose is documented. Khufu's cartouche appears within the structure in workers' graffiti, identifying the pyramid as his monument. The workforce model has been transformed by excavation. The discovery by Egyptologist Mark Lenner in the 1990s of a workers' village at Giza with bakeries, breweries, medical facilities, and a sophisticated food distribution system established that the builders were not slaves, but a permanent, well-organized, well-fed workforce of skilled laborers and administrators. A papyrus discovered at the Red Sea port of Wadi al-Jarf in 2013, the Diary of Merer, the oldest known administrative papyrus in Egypt, documents in detail the transport of fine white limestone casing stones from the Tura quarries to Giza by boat along a purpose-built canal system with named overseers, daily work records, and ration distributions. This is a real document. It describes real logistics. The Egyptians were not building by magic. They were building by management. This context is essential. The Great Pyramid was produced by one of the most administratively sophisticated states of the Bronze Age, with access to a managed labor force, specialized tool industries, a river transport network, and a tradition of stone construction extending back over several centuries before Khufu's reign. The platform on which the pyramid's anomaly sits is one of the most competent building programs in human history. And then there is the stone. The Great Pyramid contains approximately 2.3 million individual stone blocks. The base statistic is familiar, but its implications are not, because what the 2.3 million figure actually describes is this: 2.3 million discrete stone surfaces, each of which had to be shaped to a tolerance, precise enough to bear structural load when placed in contact with the surface beside it, below it, and in the most critical zones above it, with the full weight of the pyramid's remaining courses pressing down. The average weight of those blocks is roughly 2.5 to 3 tons. Easier to handle, just with the ramp, sledge, and lever technology the mainstream model proposes. A subset of granite blocks in the interior chambers, specifically the roof beams of the king's chamber, which bears the static load of all the masonry above it, weighs between 25 and 80 tons each. Those blocks came from the granite quarries at Aswan, 800 kilometers south of Giza, upriver. The Wadi al-Jarf papyrus confirms river transport was used for the limestone casing blocks. The granite, heavier and coming from further south, required the same basic logistics extended to a longer route and a more demanding material. None of that is the anomaly. The anomaly is the joints. The outer casing stones, now largely stripped from the pyramid, most were removed in the medieval period for use in Cairo's construction, though remnant casing stones survive at the pyramid's base, were fitted together with a mean joint thickness of approximately 0.5 millimeters. This figure comes not from estimate, but from direct measurement by W. Flinders Petrie, the founding figure of scientific Egyptology, who measured the casing stones at Giza in 1881 to 1882 with instruments of documented precision. His measurements have been corroborated by subsequent surveys using modern equipment. The number holds, 0.5 millimeter, across the entire original casing, which covered approximately 85,000 square meters of external surface area. The joint compound found in those gaps, a fine calcium sulfate mortar, thin and consistent, was demonstrably not structural. Petrie noted this explicitly in his published analysis. The mortar was used as a lubricant during the placement of the casing stones, allowing fine adjustment of position before the stone settled under its own weight. It was not intended to fill an imprecise gap. The stones themselves were expected to carry the load, surface to surface, with a tolerance of 0.5 millimeter. For contextual scale, the standard tolerance for precision ground granite surface plates in modern industrial metrology, the measurement standard used when you need a flat surface accurate enough to calibrate other precision instruments, is 0.001 inches, or approximately 0.025 millimeters. The pyramid casing stones are not at metrology laboratory grade, but they are within a factor of 20 of it, achieved with copper chisels, granite pounders, and human hands on 85,000 square meters of surface area. Now add the orientation. The Great Pyramid's 4 sides align with true north, south, east, and west with an accuracy measured at approximately 3.6 arc minutes, that is 3/60ths of 1 degree of error from the cardinal directions. The Paris Observatory, built in 1671 as a precision scientific instrument intended specifically for astronomical observation, is aligned to within approximately 21 arc minutes of true north. The pyramid is approximately 6 times more accurately oriented than the Paris Observatory and was built 4,200 years earlier. These two facts, joint tolerance and cardinal alignment, are individually remarkable. Together, at the scale of the structure they describe, they constitute an anomaly that sits outside the accepted record of what Copper Age engineering, by any model yet proposed, can deliver. The mainstream answer exists. It just doesn't fit the numbers. The most rigorous counter-argument for the Great Pyramid is also, appropriately, the most rigorous in the field of Egyptology. It is not a single argument, but a coordinated model, and it deserves full presentation. On the joint tolerances, the proposed mechanism is the lapping technique, the same basic abrasive grinding method proposed for Inca stonework, but here with specific Egyptian documentation of its application to precision surface work in tool manufacture. In the lapping model, a known flat reference surface propagates its flatness to the stones ground against it. You grind stone A against reference surface R until stone A matches R. You grind stone B against R until it matches R. Stones A and B will then match each other to the precision of R. This method requires no measurement instruments. It requires a flat reference, an abrasive compound, and time. Given sufficient skilled labor and a production line that standardized and systematically applied this technique to the casing stones, 0.5 millimeter tolerances are physically achievable. This argument is not hand-waving. It has been tested in partial experimental reconstruction and found to produce the observed results at small scale. On the orientation, archaeologist Kate Spence of the University of Cambridge published a model in 2000 in the journal Nature, proposing that the pyramid's north alignment was established by the simultaneous transit method, identifying true north by bisecting the angle between two circumpolar stars, Kochab and Mizar, at the moment they cross the same vertical. This method requires only a plumb line and a careful naked-eye observer. It is available to any Bronze Age astronomer. Spence's model has been debated and refined, but its core mechanism, precision orientation from naked-eye stellar observation, is considered by mainstream Egyptology to be a serious and likely explanation. Both of these arguments are peer-reviewed, published, and accepted by a significant majority of Egyptologists as the most plausible mechanisms on current evidence. They are not dismissible. They hold until you ask the question of rate. The pyramid was built in approximately 20 years, 2.3 million blocks, that is 115,000 blocks per year, approximately 315 blocks per day, every day, for 20 years. Each block shaped moved from quarry to site, lifted into position, and surface fitted to 0.5 millimeter tolerance. The lapping technique explains how the precision was achieved on an individual block. It does not address the time available per block under the 20-year model. Experimental reconstruction of the lapping process for a single casing stone surface takes skilled craftspeople working continuously, a period measured in days, not minutes. Multiply that by 2.3 million blocks, divide by 20 years, and the numbers do not converge. The construction models proposed, ramp-based haulage, with workforce calculations published by researchers, including Lunner and engineer Craig Smith, account for the lifting and placing at the required rate. They have been modeled convincingly. No single published model has simultaneously demonstrated that the lifting rate and the jointing precision are achievable together with the same workforce within the same 20-year window. That is not a failure of imagination or a gap in our general understanding of ancient capability. It is an open problem, a specific measurable arithmetic incompatibility between the throughput required and the per-unit labor cost of the precision achieved. 40 years of sustained experimental and theoretical work by serious researchers has narrowed the gap. It has not closed it. That isn't speculation. That is the current state of the published literature. The Great Pyramid was the most precisely constructed large structure in the human record for approximately 3,800 years after its completion. We built things taller, we built things heavier, we built things more visually spectacular. But the joint tolerance, 0.5 millimeters across 85,000 square meters, was not equaled at comparable scale until the 20th century, when we had computer-aided manufacturing, laser alignment systems, and diamond-tipped cutting equipment as standard industrial tools. What knowledge did the engineers of Khufu's court possess that allowed them to achieve, in 2560 BCE, what required 2.5 millennia of technological development to match under any other circumstance? And this is the question that the literature does not answer, and that perhaps no one has asked with sufficient directness. Why, in 4,500 years of continuous and sophisticated civilization in the Nile Valley after the Great Pyramid was completed, did no one in Egypt build anything to that tolerance again? The knowledge was there, the workforce capacity was there, the administrative infrastructure was there. The subsequent dynasties built ambitiously and extensively for 3,000 more years, and not one of them produced joints like Khufu's. Every structure on this list shares one characteristic that no model has satisfactorily explained across all 5 cases: a precision of construction that measurably exceeds the confirmed capability of the tools and methods assigned to the civilization credited with building it, not by a small margin that might be attributed to measurement error or the limits of experimental reconstruction, by a physically documented, peer-reviewed, arithmetically specific gap in joint tolerances, in transport logistics, in subtraction volumes, in astronomical alignment accuracy, that sustained professional attention has narrowed and has not closed, not one site, not 2, every one of them, on 4 separate continents, in 5 separate eras, among 5 civilizations that by every account we have knew nothing of each other's existence. Which brings us back to the question this list was always building toward. Not the comfortable version, not how did they do this, which allows us to search for a better technical model within the framework we already hold. The harder version, if the civilizations we credit with these structures could not, by their confirmed tools and methods, have produced them to the precision we can physically measure, then either our models of human capability in the deep past are wrong in ways we have not yet found, or something about what happened in the proto-historic world is missing from the record in a way we do not yet have the framework to examine. Either answer is more interesting than the one we currently have. Tell me in the comments which of these 5 structures you believe no modern engineering team could replicate today, to the same tolerance, using only the tools and methods confirmed for the original builders. One structure, one specific reason, not a general sense of wonder, a specific technical objection. I want to see where the disagreement falls. New episode every week. If these are the questions that keep you returning to the evidence, you are exactly in the right place.